I am Damon, not from Ithaca. My name was never etched into the lineage of a mighty king like Odysseus, nor do the clatter of my armor, the bloody whisper of my sword, or the murmur of my soul echo in Homer's immortal epics, those eternal songs. I was merely a soldier, nameless, faceless, a common man lost among tens of thousands of other unnamed souls. For 10 long years, I fought on the cursed, blood-soaked, ominous ground of Troy. Every morning, with the first pale light of the sun, I plunged my sword into the earth with pain, as if in tribute to the dead soil. And every night, without cleansing the enemy's blood from my hands, without purifying the stain on my soul, with the bitter, iron taste of that blood on my tongue and the reflection of burning flames in my eyes, I slept. That blood, over time, had seeped into my skin, its scent an inseparable part of my soul, a smell I felt with every breath, etched into the depths of my mind. Each sunset was a brutal sign of surviving another day, of killing another day. A chance to take a final breath, unaware of the horror the next dawn would bring. And each dawn arrived paler, more hopeless, and leaving my soul more weary than the last. When Troy finally fell, the flames rising from the ancient, proud city walls ascended to the sky, crying out not the wrath of the gods, but the endless destruction, greed, and blindness of humanity. Even the city stones cracked under the weight of this horror. Thousands of years of history turning to ash in an instant, as if time itself was burning. In every corner, every ruin, there was the terrifying stench of burning bodies, the echo of agonizing screams, and the cold, insidious breath of death. A heavy scent in the air, a history written with the ink of pain and annihilation. Everyone screamed in the intoxication of victory. Laughter rose from Agamemnon's tent, and glorious sacrifices were offered to Ares, Zeus, and Athena. Yet within me, amidst all this noise and celebration, there was an indescribable emptiness. This void felt as if a part of my soul had been torn out and replaced with ash. My feet seemed to tread not on soil, but on the ghosts of the past, crushed under this bloody victory. With every step, I heard a moan, a lament from the depths of my soul. Could victory be so cruel, so empty, so meaningless? Was all this blood, this loss, this destruction for this? These questions gnawed at me like a snake, delving deeper with each passing second. After days of plunder, Troy was left behind like a ruined tomb. People who once thrived in the city's lively streets were now nameless shadows, their lifeless bodies scattered throughout the city. While furs, gold, and captives were piled high in Agamemnon's massive tent, we, the common soldiers, bore only the burden of survival, the curse upon us. Our bodies were exhausted, our souls shattered. One morning, with the first pale light of the sky, Odysseus's fleet appeared on the horizon, preparing for the journey home, and I joined them without hesitation. As I stepped onto the deck, they didn't ask who I was, what my name was, where I came from, or why I had fought. The soot and grime covering my face and soul had erased all my past, for no one recognized anyone anymore. The horror of Troy had erased all identities, turning us into mere surviving, nameless souls. We were all shadows in the vast embrace of the sea, awaiting fate to drag us like lifeless objects drifting into the unknown. As we boarded the ship, the calm Aegean Sea greeted us with a deceptive tranquility, like an illusion. The water's surface was smooth, the sun shone as if what had happened in Troy had never occurred. But the sky was deceiving us, for when the gods fall silent, when their divine breath ceases, a storm is near, chaos begins. And the gods had turned their backs on us. Perhaps they sought to account for the innocent blood shed in Troy, the shattered temples, the broken vows, unleashing their wrath upon us. Perhaps this was their justice, the price of mortal victory. Or perhaps even they preferred to remain silent after such great destruction, to ignore this horror, ashamed of us. Who knows? Perhaps in their eyes we were now mere ants, not worth seeing, not worth remembering.
The first days of the journey passed with insidious comfort. The soldiers, their weary bodies slumped on the ship's wooden deck, tried to forget the horror of Troy, the pain of war. Some dreamed of their distant families, while others simply stared into the void. In the evenings, whispers would rise, remembering those left behind, those lost at sea, those who perished in Troy. But this brief peace did not last long. On the first night, with the rising of the moon, the air suddenly grew heavy. The wind rapidly shifted direction, slapping our faces like a harsh blow. The sea suddenly swelled, waves grew, and began to rock and swallow the ship like a colossal hand. The sky split open, lightning illuminated the sea and the ship, and deafening thunder brought the final echoes of war, as if the heavens themselves were weeping. As the ship tossed like a leaf between gigantic waves, the agonizing screams of those who fell into the sea cut through the night. Each scream was a dagger, piercing my heart. Those who were heroes just days ago were now forgotten corpses at the bottom of the sea. I clung to the ropes, my fingers calloused, my weak body violently thrown. I gazed at the sky, searching for the familiar constellations from the tales my mother told me on the nights of Philia. But among the silent stars, there was no longer Athena's wisdom, Poseidon's mercy, or Zeus's ancient mighty gaze. Only darkness, and a curse rising from within this darkness, a curse settling over us, ready to devour us. The storm had also engulfed my soul. The fragments of innocence I lost in Troy was sinking into the depths of the sea with these waves. With each crashing wave, another piece of my past broke away, and I drifted towards nothingness. The last remnants of joy from my childhood, my innocent dreams, drowned in these salty waters. That night, the last fragment of my childhood disappeared. That Damon who ran through the olive groves of Philia, listened to his mother's tales, and dreamed of being a warrior, had drowned in this storm, never to return. That night, a part of the Damon within me drowned, leaving behind only a weary body and a soul filled with pain, close to madness. In that moment when the war took over my soul, alienating me from myself, I had sunk to the bottom of the sea with the ashes of Troy into an eternal darkness. The next day, the sun rose again. The sky was clear blue. The sea had calmed, as if the horror of last night had never happened. But the shipwrecks floating around us, shattered masts, broken oars, and bodies washed ashore were the terrible marks left by the storm. We had diminished. The fleet was scattered. many ships and soldiers swallowed by the depths of the sea. The ship was broken, sails torn, masts shattered. We had survived, but at what cost? What was the price of this survival? And the real storm had only just begun, for the way home is sometimes nothing but ruin, regret, and endless solitude. My journey would be very different from Odysseus's epic. It was not an epic of heroism, but of loss and oblivion, the brutal journey of the human soul.
The dawn of the second day, though so little time had passed since we left the bloody shores of Troy behind, again found the sky a clear blue, and the sea spread out before us in a deceptive stillness. The sun shone as if no horror had occurred, no lives extinguished, just like our initial journey to Troy, full of hope and promise. Yet this calm was filled with an unnameable, mysterious unease that gnawed at us. None of us could trust this artificial silence, for after Troy, no silence was just silence anymore. At any moment, everything could change. Everything could be turned upside down. A storm could stealthily approach, the wind could suddenly shift direction, and the gods, thoughtlessly like a child scattering toys, could unleash their wrath upon us. We felt the bitter lesson learned from years of war deep in our bones. Nothing in this world was safe, especially not in the calmest moments when everything was thought to be over. That tranquility was like a killer's silent footsteps. We all knew this unchangeable, brutal truth, but still, none of us spoke. It was as if even words were crushed under this heavy, gloomy atmosphere. Our vocal cords rusted. Everyone wrestled with their inner storm, with the ghosts of their past, with the lives they left behind in Troy. The empty stares in their eyes were in fact the reflection of the storm in their souls. The ship progressed slowly, so slowly that every stroke of the oar echoed like a final breath. The sails struggled to swell with the meager breath of the wind, and every mile that passed stretched out like a lifetime, turning into an endless torture. The sun's merciless rays scorched the deck, and the rising smell of soot from the planks reminded us of the burnt stench of Troy, that smell of humanity which clung to our bodies and rotted our souls. Water and provisions dwindled. Every sip, every bite was precious. These things we once consumed in abundance had now become a blessing. Groans rose among the crew and oarsmen. Some collapsed from thirst and exhaustion, fainting and falling to the ground like corpses. Others woke up screaming in their sleep at night. In their eyes were the ghosts of Troy, in their ears the cries of the dying. It was as if even sleep brought us not peace, but the horror of the past. Even the sound of the waves no longer seemed frightening, because the real fear was not in the ship, but within each of us. The same expression was in all our eyes. This was not the way home. This path was a punishment itself, an ending torment, a destiny ordained by the gods. It was as if the gods had not killed us in Troy, but condemned us to this eternal, unknown journey. Some nights the sky was perfectly clear. Stars stretched like a bright veil over Philia, shining like millions of tiny eyes. They blinked, sparkling like thousands of tiny lighthouses of hope, and the moon left a bright silver trail on the sea, like a mirror reflecting its light from the wooden deck. In that moment, for an instant, you fell into an illusion, thinking that everything would return to normal, that all the horror would end, that this nightmare would one day be over. But beneath that beauty, behind that thin veil of tranquility, lay another truth. We all felt that something was waiting beneath that silence, that a storm was quietly approaching, like a storm whose eruption we didn't know when, Every cloud in the sky, every ripple of the sea was a sign of impending disaster. The storm drums had already begun to beat deep within our minds. We knew it was coming. Each of us felt it, but there was nothing we could do except wait, except surrender to our fate. This waiting was harder than fighting, for the unknown was the greatest enemy, a poison gnawing at the soul.
On the third night, the awaited storm finally arrived. First, the wind intensified, like a howl, like the howling of wild wolves in the mountains, shaking the ship's masts, each mast groaning in pain. The sails strained like the hide of a wild beast, rustling as if they would tear. The masts began to groan, suffering as if they would break. Then the rows rose, crashing down on us like colossal walls of water, like mighty monsters trying to swallow the ship. The ship would rise for a moment, seeming to touch the sky, then crash hard into the water, as if dropped from the heavens by a divine hand. With each impact, my bones rattled, a piece of my soul breaking away. The timbers groaned, moans rose from all parts of the ship sounding like an instrument, its agonizing groans. Ropes snapped, unable to withstand the might of the wind and waves, unraveling thread by thread. A comrade, Nikos from Lycona, next to me lost his balance and was swept into the sea. My outstretched hand remained in the air, a cry for help caught in my throat, not escaping my lips. Only my eyes caught Nikos's last desperate glance. He was never seen again. The waves swallowed him as if he had never existed. No one would even remember his name. At that moment, I felt something tear within me. Not just a rope, but the last piece of hope in my soul, the last fragment of innocence from my childhood. I clung to the ropes, my fingers calloused, my nails dug into my flesh, my body convulsing with pain. My feet felt nailed to the planks. My body focused on survival, fighting by instinct. But my mind was elsewhere. Memories I left behind in Troy flashed in my mind. The desperate faces in burning houses, the screams of the innocent, and Theros's, yes, Kaelen's friend Theros's final scream. That scream echoed in my ears again that night, this time merging with Nikos's silent disappearance, with the roar of bodies mixing with the sea. This was not just nature's fury. This was a clear sign of the gods having completely turned their backs on us, abandoning us to our fate. In their eyes, we were merely sacrificial lambs, nameless souls lost in the void. Neither our victories nor our suffering mattered to them. Perhaps even the gods, after such a great war, were tired of dealing with us and had abandoned us to our own dark destiny. By morning, the storm had ceased. The sky was once again clear blue, the sea calm, as if all that horror had been a dream, as if it had never happened. Yet the shipwrecks floating around us, shattered masts, broken oars, and bodies washed ashore were the terrible marks left by the storm. We had diminished. The fleet was scattered, many ships and soldiers swallowed by the depths of the sea, their names forgotten. The ship was heavily damaged, like a ghost ship, moving slowly, seemingly about to sink at any moment. Several of our men were missing, their bodies laid to eternal sleep at the bottom of the sea. Morale was shattered. The remaining soldiers looked at each other with dull expressions in their eyes, their hopelessness evident on their faces. No one spoke. Words were caught on their throats. Everyone just breathed, deeply and raggedly, because even being able to breathe was now a miracle, a blessing, but also a curse. Every breath reminded us of the pains of Troy and the sea. And I, that morning, realized something. This path did not lead to my homeland, Philia, but to the wreck within me. I had not died in Troy. I had clung to life through sword blows and arrow rain, My body remained intact, but here, in the middle of this silent sea, I was slowly wasting away, the last light within me fading, my soul struggling for life. Perhaps the bitterest part of war began after the war ended, the emptiness that followed victory, the weight of losses, and the poison of regret. While physical wounds healed, spiritual wounds continued to bleed, impossible to close. My body, which survived Troy, had left my soul behind, forgotten it in those bloody lands. I was no longer Damon. I was the one who cannot return, a shadow whose name no one would remember, who could not go home. This was my true epic, a journey into nothingness.
We escaped the relentless grip of the storm and continued our journey after that horrific night. But nothing was the same anymore. Neither the sky, nor the sea, nor we, the nameless souls aboard the ship. It was as if the very fabric of time had broken. Everything felt like a dream, but a nightmare of a dream. The ship was like a wounded, heavily damaged ghost, its masts cracked, sails in tatters, timbers groaning in pain with every wave. Each plank creaked as if it had a life of its own, and the cold seawater seeped into the holds, every leak carrying away the hope within us. The crew was exhausted, their spirits heavy as lead, their morale shattered. The childlike sparkle in their eyes had faded, replaced by dull, hopeless gazes, turning their eyes into voids. No one spoke, only raspy breaths and occasional groans were heard. Everyone seemed to have fallen into the depths of their own dark well, their souls like a dungeon with no way out. At times we thought we saw an island or a familiar piece of land on the horizon, but it always turned out to be just an illusion, a trick played by our eyes and souls. As we approached, we would only encounter fog and vast emptiness. It was as if the sea wanted to pull us in, to drown us in its endless blue depths, whispering that we would reach nowhere, that we would drift in these cursed waters forever. This fog enveloped not just the sea, but our souls too, blurring our minds, disconnecting us from reality. Hope fluttered like a sparrow, but each time it disappeared into this fog, its wings broken. Every new sunrise began with a fresh disappointment, and every sunset deepened the despair a little more. Tension among the men grew like a snake, injecting its venom into our veins. Hunger, thirst, and sleeplessness slowly gnawed at even the most resilient souls, turning them into shadows. Whispers sowed the poisonous seeds of pessimism throughout the ship, each whisper instilling fear in another. Some grumbled, "We've incurred the wrath of the gods," claiming the storm and losses were the price for the innocent blood we shed in Troy, rebellion in their voices. Others sought salvation in prayer, seeking refuge in the mercy of the gods. With trembling hands they reached for wooden god idols, prayers spilling from their lips, but even these prayers dissolved into the void. I remained silent, grappling with the emptiness accumulating in my soul. I had no strength left to speak, nothing left to believe in. I couldn't find the strength within myself to judge their fears or their beliefs, because all I knew was that the wounds of the war we left behind still bled within us. These wounds were not physical, but spiritual, and they were hidden deep within us, impossible to close. Each of us had our own Troy, our own hell, a prison that confined us in our minds. One afternoon, as the sun set, the sky turned crimson and purple hues, looking like a bleeding wound. We sat around a dying campfire, our bodies weary, our souls exhausted. The roar of the sea mingled with the whisper of the wind like a deafening lament. My childhood friend Lysandros, one of those who felt the pain of Troy most deeply, turned to me. His eyes were as deep as the darkness of the sea, his soul exhausted from weariness, years of burden on his shoulders. His voice was a low, hopeless whisper. Damon, we fought for so many years, with our bodies, with our souls. We razed Troy to the ground. We forged epics of heroism that will be sung in poems. We won victories. But where are we going now? Is this path home or to an eternal hell? It feels like every step drags us deeper, pulling us to the bottom. We are fighting not with our swords, but with our destiny, with our souls. What do the gods want from us? Why have they tested us so much? Why do they continue to test us? Is there an end to this suffering, Damon? Does the place you call home still exist for us? Or did it fall with the walls of Troy?
I had to answer, but words caught in my throat, my tongue dry. The cry of the rage, anger, and pain within me prevented my voice from rising. I turned my gaze to the horizon. It was like a symbol of hopelessness, an endless void. I wanted to avert my eyes, but I had to accept this truth. I don't know, Lysandros. The gods don't speak. They seem deaf. The sea wants to swallow us. Every wave tries to pull us in. Even the land alienates us. Everywhere we step feels like an enemy. Everything is in chaos. We are in a labyrinth. But all I want right now is to survive. Just to breathe. To see the light of the next day. Maybe to see my mother's face again. My voice trembled. The words hung in the air as if they would scatter with a gust of wind. When I saw the deep pain, hopelessness, and desperation in Lysandros' eyes, I understood it was a reflection of my own fear. That night, both of us were silent for a long time, accompanied only by the crackling of the campfire and the sound of the waves, and the agonizing groans of our souls. We both knew there was so much more in the air than what we said, a weight that words could not describe. The next day, as the sun rose, the calmness on the sea shattered, just like the hope within us. The wind grew fierce again, this time more merciless, more enraged than the previous storm. The sails, already worn and patched, couldn't withstand this force. They ripped to shreds, each piece scattered into the sea like a fragment of hope, disappearing from sight. The ship once again began to sway like a toy between gigantic waves, its timbers creaking, on the verge of breaking at any moment, its noise deafening. Amidst the massive, roaring, maddened waves surrounding us, we felt how small we had become against the sea's cruel power. We, the heroes who had defied great armies and torn down walls, were now helpless against nature's most fundamental force. The same expression was on everyone's face, blind terror and deep despair. Some knelt and prayed, some merely stared into the void, their eyes dulled, as if their souls had already abandoned their bodies. That day, in the midst of that terrifying storm, another comrade, the strong and silent Kairos, fell into the sea. In an instant, a massive wave swept across the ship's deck, taking Kairos with it. We all tried to save him with our last ounce of strength. Ropes were thrown, shouts were made, but the sound of the storm drowned out our voices. However, the waves mercilessly took him, pulling him into the depths, as if to erase his very name. Before our eyes, another friend surrendered to the dark embrace of the sea. Having survived Troy, here he drifted towards a nameless grave. Silence fell. This loss opened a new void in our hearts, a wound that would not close, would not heal. Tears did not stream from our eyes.
Perhaps we had no more tears left to cry, or the horror we experienced had numbed all emotions, leaving us insensitive. After that night, none of us were the same anymore. With every person we lost, another part of us diminished. Not only our bodies, but our souls were shattering too, a little more with each passing day. The ship had dragged the last fragments of our hope from Troy into the depths of the sea, pulling us towards nothingness. And Damon, in the silence of that dark, endless night, slowly understood that what was more merciless than the sea was not the storm outside, but his inner fears and endless regrets. Every life he killed in Troy came back to life in this storm, gnawing at his soul. Even sleep had become torture. Every life he saved, on the other hand, turned into a ghost in the midst of this silence, relentlessly pursuing him. He raised his eyes to the sky. The stars were still there, shining over Philia, unchanging. But for him, they were far from being a source of hope. They were just memories, inaccessible monuments of loss. Those stars reminded him of his innocence, his childhood, his state before going to Troy. These memories felt like a bitter smile. That night, Damon felt, in the deepest depths of his soul, that he was in the midst of a storm that was losing him. The real journey was not a return home, but a vanishing into the labyrinths of his soul. Even if this sea wasn't his grave, it would be where his soul was buried. And he understood then that no matter how much he survived, his soul had long ago mingled with the ashes of Troy, drowned in the depths of the sea. He was now the one who cannot return.
After escaping the relentless wrath of storms and waves, days chased each other. Each new dawn was like a copy of the last, gray and hopeless. Yet we still drifted in the middle of the sea, like objects dangling in a bottomless abyss. The ship's hull groaned, its sails were torn to shreds, reduced to rags. Reaching land, which sometimes appeared like a glimmer of hope on the horizon, often turned into just another disappointment. Lands lost in fog, like deceptions, were a torment, dragging our souls deeper into despair. Everyone was now a stranger to each other, because the pain of war and sea had struck each of us in different places, opening incurable wounds in each of our souls. Words had lost their value. Eyes were filled with silent screams. A heavy silence reigned within the ship. That silence was louder than the roar of the sea, because in each of our minds, the screams of Troy, the last breaths of lost friends echoed. It was a night when no one could sleep. Although the sky was full of stars, those stars, rather than guiding us, shone like cold monuments of a distant world. I, Damon, clung to the iron railings at the very end of the deck, battling nightmares. When I closed my eyes, the flames of burning Troy, the blood from open wounds, the cries of the innocent danced in my mind like a hellish ballet. I was crushed under the growing weight within me. This weight was the burden of thousands of dead souls, lost hopes, wasted sacrifices. The burden of losses, fears, and regrets was like a heavy, rusty armor hanging from my shoulders. With every movement, it pierced my soul, pulling me deeper. What I thought about most was my comrade Theros, with whom I had fought in Troy, shared childhood dreams of heroism, and laid to rest in those bloody lands. The pain of his death pierced my heart anew. With every sound of the waves, every storm echoed his last scream in my ears. Theros' innocent smile, that pure hope he maintained despite the horror of war, now remained an unhealing wound in my soul. I whispered to the wind, "I wish it had been me instead of him. I wish he hadn't died."
His loss for me was not just the loss of a comrade, but also the loss of my innocence, my childhood, my faith. Suddenly, from behind, a voice cut through the silence of the night like a knife. It was Lysandros, another comrade with whom I had fought side by side for years, though not as close as Theros. In his hand was a broken bottle, probably once holding wine, but now only the bitterness of the sea and the emptiness of souls. He spoke with a trembling voice. His face looked pale in the moonlight. His eyes, like mine, held that indescribable emptiness and despair. Damon, we're all here, physically inside this ship, but many of our souls are already lost, sunk to the bottom of the sea or left in the ashes of Troy. Each of us has turned into a ghost. Just surviving is no longer enough. Just breathing, just waking up to the next day doesn't give us a reason to live. We need a reason, a purpose, a glimmer of hope, a direction. Otherwise, we will dissolve in this endless sea, on this cursed ship, our existence forgotten, vanishing like drops falling into the sea. These words caused a deep tremor in my soul. Lysandros was right, so right that the weight of this truth was heavier than the armor on my shoulders. We were lost between the meaninglessness of war and the cruelty of the sea. In a sea of aimlessness, our compass broken, we had lost our way. But what were we fighting for? What did we want to live for? The answer to this question was no longer in any of us. Victory had left us with only emptiness. After Troy, we thought everything was over, but our real trial was just beginning.
At that moment, I understood that on the way home, the greatest enemy was not just the sea, not just the storms, not just the wrath of the gods, but ourselves, our own fears, our own despair, our own endless regrets. This mental and spiritual weight was more destructive than even the fiercest waves. Without confronting them, without defeating them, this journey would not end. This was like a prophecy echoing in the depths of my soul. Victories won with the sword were hollow. The real battle was the one fought within oneself. Damon, in the darkness of that night, faced this truth, illuminated by Lysandros' words. He closed his eyes and vividly imagined Theros' pale face crushed under the wreckage of Troy. At that moment, he made a decision. This journey would not just be a return home, but a journey of salvation, a journey to save himself, his soul. The next morning, with the first light of the sun, I went up to the ship's deck. My body was tired, my eyes red from lack of sleep, but there was a new resolve in my soul. The remaining soldiers had silently gathered on the deck, looking at me. On their faces, I could read both curiosity and deep despair. I looked at them, seeing their own battles in each of their eyes. I raised my voice, strong enough to overcome the roar of the storm. Comrades, for days we have been drifting in the middle of the sea. The ship is wounded, our bodies are tired, our souls exhausted. Some of us have departed, taken by the sea. We survived Troy, we fought to return home, but now we have forgotten what we are fighting for. But remember, we were ordinary soldiers, yes, but we were also part of those who razed Troy to the ground. And right now, the greatest enemy before us is greater than the sea, more powerful than the wrath of the gods. I paused briefly, letting my gaze sweep over each comrade one by one. I felt the despair, exhaustion, and anticipation in their eyes. Our greatest enemy is the despair within us. It is the fear within us, and it is the regret within us. For the memory of Theros, and for those of us who remain, we will continue to fight. For them, we must cross this sea. Perhaps our journey is long and arduous. Perhaps there are many more storms ahead, but we will not give up. Even if our swords rust, our souls will not. We will cling to each other. No one will be alone on this journey." My words echoed, and as they echoed, a slight stir began on the deck. In some eyes, for the first time in a long time, a flicker appeared. From that day on, a new silent solidarity began on the ship. No one was alone anymore. They were united for a purpose, the purpose of survival and return home. As everyone fought their inner fears, Damon's words became a spark of hope, a small, weak, but still existent spark. Everyone's face brightened a little more, their shoulders straightened a little more. But we didn't know that our real trials had not yet begun. The sea was merely a pawn in the gods' game. The threads of fate were still uncertain, and they could drag us into deeper abysses.
Days chased weeks, and weeks chased months. The sea was still our merciless enemy, its waves ready to swallow us at any moment, its wind intent on freezing our souls. Yet within us, that small spark of hope, ignited by Lysandros's words and my resolve, miraculously never died out. Though faint and flickering, it defied the darkness. Damon and his comrades, with their tired, exhausted bodies, broken ropes, torn sails, and leaky holds, stood firm against the raging waves of this mighty sea. They were no longer fighting only physically, but spiritually as well. Every wave was a blow, every storm a test. The ship, like a ghost, glided through the sea of despair. One morning, with the first light of the sun, a green strip finally appeared in the distance, on the horizon. For the first time in a long time, our eyes met not an illusion, but real land. We could smell the sweet scent of earth, fresh grass, and the familiar Mediterranean pines and olive trees. This scent was vastly different from the heavy, salty smell of war and the sea. It whispered memories of our childhood. We were approaching the end of our journey back to Ithaca, our homeland. Perhaps the gods, despite all the suffering, had not entirely abandoned us. Damon's heart was filled with mixed, complex emotions. A deep joy, an indescribable relief that came with setting foot on land after years, but also a fear, an anxiety about what awaited him at home, whether everything had changed upon his return, and most of all, an endless regret that gnawed at his soul. The lives he left behind in Troy, the horror he experienced, the massacres he committed, all burdened his shoulders like a heavy load. Finally, as the ship docked, I stepped onto the shore with feet trembling from years of fatigue. Feeling the weight of my body on solid ground was a strange sensation. It was the first time in 10 years I had stood on such firm footing. However, Damon was no longer the same. War had changed him deeply. Every blow, every scream had left permanent scars on his soul and body. The lines on his face had deepened, his cheeks were hollow, and the childlike fire in his eyes completely extinguished, replaced by a deep weariness and questioning. The white strands in his hair were like white scars. But despite all this change, there was still a tiny desire to live within him, a spark of hope, stubbornly refusing to fade. I walked towards my village, my feet moving almost on their own. With every step, my heart beat faster, my mind overflowing with childhood memories. The familiar scent of my home, the imagined smoke from its chimney, my mother's voice. Walking these paths after so many years was also like searching for the me from 10 years ago. The olive trees at the village entrance were still there, gently swaying in the wind, but the laughter of children playing under the trees was gone. The streets were silent. When I reached the door of my home, my heart pounded as if it would burst from my chest. The door creaked softly as it used to. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. But as he stepped into the house, He felt the pangs of return, not only physically, but spiritually too. The scent inside was not the warm and reassuring smell of home I once knew. It was a foreign scent, as if someone else entirely lived here. The marks of war were not only on my body, but on the walls of the house, in the arrangement of the furniture. In place of the rug my mother once wove, there was a strange cover. Where my father used to pull up his chair and sit, now someone else sat.
And then I saw them. My mother, her back bent with the weariness of years, her hair completely white, stood by the hearth. My father, with deep lines on his aged face but still strong shoulders, sat in his chair. My siblings, Thea and Philemon, had grown, with no trace of their childhood selves remaining. My heart swelled with joy. I wanted to cry out, "I'm here! Damon is here!" But I couldn't. I approached my mother. I looked into her eyes. I searched for that familiar tenderness, that love in her gaze. But all I saw was an empty stare. My mother squinted at me, her face wearing the expression of someone looking at a stranger. I reached out my hand, wanting to touch her, wanting to say, "It's me, Mother, your son, Damon." But she gently pulled her hand back. "Welcome, son. Who are you looking for?" Her voice was old, trembling, yet familiar. But the foreignness in her words cut into my soul like ice. At that moment, my whole world came crashing down. My mother didn't recognize me. The pain of years, of war, of separation had erased me from her memory. Perhaps after all these years, she had even forgotten the possibility of her son's return. Her mind was no longer as it used to be. The cruelest blow of the war I took not in Troy, but in my own home. My father turned to me. There was the curiosity one would feel towards a stranger on his face. My siblings whispered, eyeing me with inquisitive looks. There was no sign of recognition in their eyes either. To them, I was just a tired stranger standing at the door, my face marked with war. Damon crumbled, not just physically, but spiritually. All his hopes, all his dreams shattered on the threshold of the home he had knocked on. He was like someone looking at his own tombstone. All evidence of his existence had been erased. I returned home, but no one remembers me. This thought spread through my soul like poison. No one was waiting for me. No one had prayed for me. I was just a soldier, a lost, forgotten soldier. My name, my memory, the blood I shed in Troy had no value left. In contrast to Odysseus's epic, my story was nothing but a nameless whisper. At that moment, I learned that war was not just a struggle with the enemy, but also with oneself. I saw my siblings, my mother, my father again, but the old Damon was long gone. I had to face the pain and losses brought by the war. But how? How could a forgotten soul make a new beginning? Silently, I turned back, moving away from my home, my family. I walked through the streets filled with strangers who looked at me with unfamiliar eyes, who didn't recognize me. With every step, I felt even lonelier. When I left the village, I looked at the horizon. These lands were my home, but I no longer belonged to this home. And so, Damon's story, in a sense, ended here, as a new story began, not of peace, but of oblivion, not of forgiveness, but of acceptance.
and not of new hope, but of emptiness. He had to make a new beginning for himself, but this beginning would not be with the warmth of his family, but with his own solitude, with the ruins within himself. Perhaps one day he could build a new home within himself. But that day was far away.